I'll just be taking this.
Wait! What are you doing with Mother's special child?
She's not hers.
Hey there, my name is Pollymacho here on YouTube, but you can just call me Alex. So I just finished another playthrough of Resident Evil Village, and I'm very excited to talk about it with you today. But to fully articulate all that I want to discuss, I will need to go into spoilers. This can range from discussing enemy types to mentioning plot details, and I would hate to ruin those moments unintentionally for you. So if you want to experience this game blind, we should part ways here, and I enjoyed our time together. See you in the next one. For those of you still around, good to have you on board. And before we fully dive in, I have to lay out my credentials for this video. First, this is coming from someone with minimal experience in the series. My first Resident Evil game was 6, which I played split screen with my brother. I've heard 6 is the black sheep of the series with its heavy influence on action rather than its survival horror roots, but I had fun with it regardless. My second game was Resident Evil 7 Biohazard, and this was the one that really stuck with me. I loved the blending of resource management with puzzles, terrifying pursuit sections, and heated combat. At this point, Resident Evil Village will be my third and latest game in the franchise, but I'm hoping to change that real soon. Second, to make sure I had a good grasp of the game for you guys, I just finished my third playthrough. The first was on standard difficulty, the second was on casual, which was my knife only in under 3-hour speedrun, and the third was on hardcore mode with a few unlockables toggled on. Alright, now that we got that out of the way, let's begin. Resident Evil Village features the return of Ethan Winters, protagonist of Resident Evil 7, 3 years after his adventure in Louisiana, living with his wife and their child Rosemary in their newfound home of what I believe is located somewhere in Europe. After tucking your child to bed, legendary boulder puncher Chris Redfield shoots your wife multiple times and attempts to take you and Rosemary into custody for an unspecified reason. From there, Ethan goes on another horrifying ordeal to rescue his daughter, or as I like to call it, Ethan Winters' very bad day. One of the aspects I really like about Village's setup is the inclusion of Ethan Winters. For a newcomer's perspective, I really like the opportunity of going through another horror-filled excursion with Ethan once again, but I also like how the previous games have affected Ethan's personality. Early on in the opening section at the Winter House, the game hammers home how Ethan is very protective, arguing that the storybook being read to his daughter is too scary for her. While looking through optional rooms in the house, you can notice documents and small touches that hammer this point home, such as the firearm manuals in Ethan's study, to which he responds with,
It's not paranoia if they're really out to get you.
I've read a few articles and reviews that are not a fan of Ethan's character, constantly asking what is going on, and has the emotional appeal of, as one review coined it, of a wet floor mop. Now, everyone is entitled to their opinion. Personally, I actually really like Ethan Winters. I like how Ethan isn't a charismatic and forceful personality, but pretty mild-mannered and ordinary. He's not an over-the-top action hero that takes everything in stride, but rather just framed as an everyman desperately trying to achieve his goals and make it to the other side as intact as possible. And that desire to remain intact is challenged repeatedly. Ethan is put through the ringer constantly, from the variety of enemies in their arsenal to the cutscenes detailing the gruesome cruelties inflicted by the primary antagonists. Every wound Ethan suffered and trial he overcame made me root for him even more, because while he is just a video game character, the first-person perspective made it feel like mine as well. And yes, I am totally willing to admit I'm biased to be in a familiar perspective from the last game, plus I really like this moment.
Well, hi there, little Rose.
So rather than progressing from one new location to another, Resident Evil Village features the village as a sort of hub base that you will be coming back to after completing the areas owned by the Four Lords. More on them later. Usually, you can only explore certain sections of the village at first, but you can unlock keys and items that open up the village more and more once you progress in the game, occasionally containing items that can help you, like ammo, modifications for weapons, crafting supplies, and even new weapons. One feature I really liked was the searching status on your map. When you're currently searching a room, the building will be coded in red, meaning that there are still more items and secrets to find, while if a location is marked as blue, you have seen everything there is to find. This feature was beneficial, and it was something I never considered until I got it. Now I feel spoiled. And on that note, I really enjoyed the opportunities for scavenging. In a game where there could be horrors around every corner, I really enjoyed the chances to stockpile gear and make interesting decisions with my crafting supplies, such as do I use my materials to create a first aid bottle, or do I go more offensive approach and craft 3 additional shotgun rounds and hope I can end combat quickly before I get hit. I never felt like I had an extreme surplus of supplies where I could go wasting them. If I had a lot of ammo, chances were I would be using them very soon on a boss. I really enjoyed the gameplay tension players would have to make with how they find and used gear. Additionally, I really dug the management system with your inventory. You're only given a finite amount of inventory space, so each item contains square dimensions of how much space it uses. You can rotate items vertically or horizontally to pack items into space and carry more than you initially believed you could. This was an entertaining mechanic that caused me to pack all my things in the most satisfying way possible. You could buy more bag space in the future, but this rotating of items is always helpful no matter how big your inventory is. Now that I've gone through a bit of the scavenging systems, I want to talk a bit about the game's combat. Combat in Resident Evil Village is a pretty satisfying experience. Weapons pack a loud and crunchy punch, and enemies are fun to encounter. Most of the time you have the opportunity to either run away if an encounter gets too overwhelming, or stand your ground and fight. There are a few encounters where fighting is the required decision, but that doesn't happen frequently enough to be a nuisance. While I really appreciate the variety of enemy types, some are a little difficult to fight, especially so in the first-person perspective. I'm mainly talking about the Lycan. These guys are really cool, but they're also really fast. Lycan can close the gap very quickly from far away. Their quick movements combined with the first-person view makes encounters with the base versions feel like a blur sometimes. One improvement in Village that I really dig is the additional option for blocking. When you encounter an enemy, you have the opportunity to put your hands up to block damage, because taking an attack head-on can be devastating. Blocking reduces the amount of damage you should take from any sort of attack, from wasps, sickles, claymores, you name it. But on top of that, you also have the option once you pull off a successful guard to push an enemy away by kicking them, allowing for a few more seconds to take care of an enemy before they get close again. I originally thought you had to time your block just right to get the chance to push back, sort of like a light parry system, but after experimenting with it, it appears all you have to do is just get a successful block to trigger the kickback. Also, one combat tip I discovered early on is that you can blind fire with a pistol if you hold down the block button while also pressing the button to shoot. Ethan keeps one hand up while the other fires. Obviously, it's more difficult to shoot something farther away than manually aiming, but it's a great option if you're cornered and need to take care of an enemy quickly before reducing damage. Early on in the Village segments, you have the opportunity to use cabinets indicated by a yellow marking to barricade doors and slow enemies down. This is a really cool inclusion, and I found myself constantly using it when the opportunity presented itself, creating a barricade and standing on the other side with a shotgun, making me feel like a survivor using the environment to his advantage. As the game progresses, this situational opportunity dies out a bit, which is a bummer because it is really fun to use. Okay, I feel like I've gone through a solid description of combat, but before I talk about the lords, I want to discuss the true lord of Resident Evil Village.
I've been waiting for you, Mr. Winters.
This is the Duke, and this guy is great. Besides being a friendly face in a hostile environment, the Duke is a businessman at heart, so he'll be your vendor for supplies like ammo, healing items, weapons, weapon mods, and crafting recipes. He'll even upgrade your weapons if you're willing to pay for his services. The Duke also provides freshly cooked meals that can permanently boost your health or block strength if you gather ingredients. These ingredients are from animals across the village and can lead to some pretty relaxing downtime as you hunt for chickens and pigs across the map. I also love the fact that after you gather these ingredients, the Duke gives you your meal for free and says something like, "Here's your share," stating that while he considers himself first and foremost a merchant, he still has a sense of compassion for Ethan, which I really liked. Now, you may be asking, how do you pay for upgrades and supplies? Well, that's going to be through the currency Lie, which can be discovered scavenging through buildings and defeating enemies. But one other way of getting currency is through what the game calls valuables. Valuables can be dropped from enemies or found through levels as treasures, usually discovered from solving optional puzzles or keeping your eyes peeled in the environment. This valuable system is really cool because in a video game about uncovering tools to help you survive methodically, having these optional rewards that can lead to more options in your playthroughs are great. These reward players looking off the beaten path, and that's super cool for a game to consider. What is also super cool is that for some valuables, you may notice they are marked as valuable/combine, and if you have the other piece, you can click combine and make it complete, and it can be sold for an even more significant profit. It's also really interesting that you can sell your equipment as a sort of risk versus reward system. Like, if there's a really cool gun you want, you can risk it by selling your other equipment just to afford it. During my first playthrough, I upgraded my shotgun to the max, only near the end of the game to find a better weapon in the Duke's store. And even though I learned how to use this shotgun most effectively and loved it, I still sold it for the chance to try something new. Mechanically, the Duke offers some really cool stuff for players that I really got into, and those mechanics are certainly appreciated, especially when dealing with the Four Lords. The Four Lords are the underlings of the game's main antagonist, Mother Miranda, who, if I'm being entirely honest, is not as interesting as her children. I think her design is really cool, but I wasn't that interested in her as an antagonist, though I can never make the claim against the Four Lords, who each are neat in their own right. Of course, I do have my personal favorites. Resident Evil Village has decided to take a different approach in their overall design, coined as a theme park of horror, as explained in the inverse article covering the game, which will be in this video's description. Resident Evil Village wanted each particular lord and their area to act as their own flavor of horror to keep the game fresh throughout its runtime. So with that said, I want to briefly go through each lord's section and give my thoughts on them overall. I'll go through each one from the order you'll encounter them in the game, and full disclosure, I only want to go through the Four Lords and not Miranda's section because while I am spoiling huge parts of the game in this video, I still want to leave at least a few narrative details for you to discover if you're interested. Plus, I don't really have any strong feelings or talking points for that section. Now there's only one good place to start.
Stupid man thing! You won't live long, even if you run!
Lady Domitresk is probably the biggest talking point when discussing Resident Evil Village, and for a good reason. She's a beautiful vampire lady standing over 9 feet and 6 inches tall. I've never played a video game where the creature pursuing you is so aesthetically pleasing that you start to question if running away is the best option. Then you remember that her daughter stabbed you in the legs with their sickles, and the mood is lost. The general experience of Lady Domitresk and her daughters is equivalent to an attractive person walking up to you and saying, "You have great skin, it would look amazing as a rug," and then they pull out a knife. At the end of the day, this is another threat that must be dealt with, or rather, this is a threat that must be avoided and then eventually dealt with. The Castle of Domitresk involves you finding 4 masks for their respective statues before eventually escaping. Throughout the level, you are constantly stalked by the lady herself and her 3 daughters, and the moments where you are pursued are some of the best in the section. The sisters can turn into swarms of insects and go through walls in their attempt to catch you. Weapons can slow them down, but it's best to wait for the right environmental opportunity to do them in. Once you get a layout of the castle, it's amusing to plan your routes in an attempt to look for the masks or escape your pursuers. This level is really cool, but the way it was paced from the first state of helplessness to rising against the odds, I seriously thought I was almost done with the game on my first playthrough. The way the sky brightened as dawn approached, and the way Lady Domitresk cackled in her final monstrous form made it feel like I just reached the game's climax, only to eventually defeat her and realize the credits weren't playing. I was so sure the game wouldn't be able to surprise me anymore, only to get to the next lord and realize what a complete fool I had been. Donna Beneviento's stage was one that I was skeptical of at first. I'd never been terrified of dolls in horror media, so I thought this section would be a dud, only to play through it and realize I wasn't giving it enough credit. Beneviento's estate acts as a psychological horror section by taking your weapons and requiring you to solve puzzles throughout its basement level. I was really impressed with how well the section was able to imbue a sense of dread. This level's imagery really got to me, making me uncomfortable, but in a good horror kind of way, such as having to take apart a mannequin of your wife to obtain keys and secrets, which felt disturbing in a way I can't really articulate with words, or traveling down dark oval-shaped hallways, which I certainly know wasn't an accident because of the monster that stalks the halls. I usually give a stronger emotional reaction to how personal the creature or its themes are in a work of horror. I see it as an opportunity to roleplay and get a better understanding of the character. I mention this because this section does it so well. Throughout the level, you are meant to reflect on Ethan's family, from his wife Mia to their daughter Rose. Beneviento uses this opportunity to play with Ethan's perception of them by having them be an inanimate object, or much worse. Roughly around the halfway point, after you get the breaker key, you make your way to the elevator, and then this happens. This is the moment that sealed the deal as my favorite Lord encounter, because the monster isn't a spooky beast with no context, but one that means so much more to Ethan than any other. Not to mention the way it's presented is amazing. It's not a forced cutscene that takes away control, but rather a moment you get to actively experience. I think it shows a lot of restraint to let your horror be presented in a more low-key way than taking away a person's movement and control to show just how scary something is. The final boss fight is just Ethan running around the estate to find the doll Donna is controlling. It's pretty satisfying to stab a spooky doll with a pair of scissors, so I'd say it's pretty good. From this point forward, there was never any other part that terrified me to the lengths the estate did, but that doesn't mean it wasn't fun. Especially so for the domain of Salvatore Moreau. Moreau's section in the reservoir was one I enjoyed more than I thought I would. The section starts surprisingly, as you get the flask way earlier than expected, and is focused on your escape from the reservoir. I also like the characterization of Moreau, constantly jumping between self-doubt on land and highlighting his much more vulnerable nature. While in the water, he strokes his ego more than any amount of backstrokes at the local pool. Even in the beginning, he plays up his distress of Ethan taking the flask, pleading not to or he'll be embarrassed by the other lords, only to reveal he was stalling for time and traps Ethan from the exit. My favorite level is the Beneviento estate, but I'd have to say my favorite of the lords would be Moreau, because I think he has the most interesting characterization on display. The stage itself is more of a long-form pursuit than a puzzle box like the previous level. Your objective is to traverse the ruined fishing village while dodging Moreau in his aquatic form. Some planks you walk across are in his pathing and can result in your death if you're not careful. I like how the planks slow down your movement, making you feel anxious about traversal, like you're taking too long and Moreau will be back at any second. Through gameplay, this makes you feel vulnerable traversing through the water, just as Moreau feels on land, and that's a really neat touch. That's all I got for this section. It's pretty brief and a good time. Alright, one more to go.
Last chance. You don't want to find out what's in that hole.
I'll take my chances.
You're futile.
Okay, so I'm gonna be a little harsh on this section because this is my least favorite part of the game. But before I do, I want to go over a few things that I really liked. First, I like how the setting of this is a rural factory, which is an interesting spin on the mechanical environment. Usually it's a much more urban setting, so to have it in the middle of nowhere is pretty cool. It provided for a really cool look when approaching the building as I traversed through a field of vegetation and snowy mountains. It's also cool when later in the level there's this section with mechanical gears moving that you have to traverse across, but there are also environmental hazards and enemies around to halt your progress and trap you. If you can assess the situation, you can use this to your advantage and have enemies be hit in the environment with a successful block encounter. This felt super cool to pull off and made me feel like a total badass. Alright, now that I've mentioned a few things I really liked, I'm gonna go over the stuff I wasn't really jiving with, and that would be everything else. Keep in mind, this is all personal opinion, so please take it with a grain of salt here. While I really loved the outside look of the factory, the inside is exactly how you expect one to look. Large, expansive, cold, and impersonal. This is a shame because the game feels its best when exploring personal and intimate locations, and when it's not, you move through it very quickly, like with the Moreau section. But the problem here is it doesn't have the personality of earlier sections, and you do so at a snail's pace, or at least it felt that way. There were multiple times in my playthroughs where I thought I made plenty of progress, only to look and realize how much more I had to go and I would just be sad. The section focuses on exploring the factory and using molds at the foundry location to create keys and items to open doors. So it's focused on backtracking to the foundry to develop an item, and then making your way back to where you wanted to go to advance. so you have to backtrack. This isn't anything new in this game. The problem arises that certain sections are very cramped and claustrophobic. Add on top of that, enemies who are now armored and cover their weak points. And they are also surprisingly thick, because sometimes you can't get through a hallway because they're blocking it. The combination of all these elements made backtracking not a fun experience. When I got a mold to make the final key, I realized I would once again be running through the foundry through the hallway of multiple armored figures and begrudgingly accepted my fate. There's also this boss fight with this propeller guy who looks horrifying in an exciting sort of way, but in all of my playthroughs, this boss is the bane of my existence. You're supposed to dodge his charges and shoot the weak point on his back, but I didn't enjoy it because with the first person camera, it doesn't feel very satisfying to dodge attacks. If you had movement options, I feel like this could be a cool encounter, but as it is, you have to turn your camera away from the propeller guy and you awkwardly run away while attempting to keep your enemy in view. There's never a moment where I felt like I pulled off a perfect dodge. It always felt sloppy. Not to mention, the fight starts with walls that block your options for movement, so chances are you're going to get hit a few times before the area opens up. And then there's this one wall that refuses to break. So when you decide to take cover from his flamethrower, move behind this area, like I did my playthrough, you have essentially trapped yourself in this space. Now you may ask, why don't you just move? And that would be a solid point. The only problem is that the flamethrower leaves areas it hits with fire. So technically, you could run through it, but you will definitely be taking damage from that and may enter a near-death state, which slows down your movement even more. Overall, I mean this in the most respectful way that I can. This fight kinda blows. What also kinda blows is Heisenberg. I really wanted to like this guy. I really did. His introduction was pretty cool. He seemed like the top dog of the lycanthropes with a bit of a temper. He also had some interesting powers with machinery, and I was really excited to see what he had in store. But he was a total letdown for me. I think the problem with him is that once it's revealed that he has his own plans and wants Ethan to join him, he doesn't stop talking about how much he hates that bitch, Mother Miranda, and the other lords. It would be fine if it happened a few times, but it's constantly repeated to an annoying degree to where it comes across as almost whiny.
I want nothing more than to be free of that bitch.
That bitch. Yes, bitches don't kill that bitch. Bitch.
Ultimately, Heisenberg and his section are my least favorite part of the game, mainly due to the length and how its gameplay is structured, including traversal and boss fights. Okay, those are my thoughts on the lords. Now, I'm sure this video is super long at this point, but before we finish, I've got two other subjects I want to cover. Resident Evil Village has something that I haven't seen in AAA games in a long time, and that is Unlockables. When you complete challenges in the game, such as beating it on a particular difficulty or doing optional tasks, you earn completion points, a currency you can use to buy figures and concept art, which can be viewed from the extras menu. On top of that, if you've fully upgraded a weapon in a playthrough, you have the opportunity to buy unlimited ammo for that weapon. Not to mention, you can purchase unique weapons through the store and even play New Game Plus, carrying over your equipment from whatever difficulty you prefer. These unlockables are so dope because they allow you to play the game repeatedly with modifiers to make it more interesting. I had a grenade launcher with unlimited ammo in my recorded playthrough, and it made the factory section way more bearable. You can even use the infinite ammo on the hardest difficulty in the game, and there's no downside to it. You put in a lot of work to earn that ability, so the game is totally cool with you using it, and that's such a fun attitude. Usually with a game, I'm way more likely to replay it if I have an incentive to play higher difficulties and spend more time with it. Village unlocks definitely scratched that itch, and it made me realize how much I missed that. I'm so used to seeing additional features in games through expansions or content updates, and while those can be sweet, seeing a game have unlockables from day one is really cool. I'm definitely going to be playing Resident Evil Village for a while, especially with its last game mode right after you beat the game.
Stand by.
The Mercenaries is a game mode that involves you defeating enemies in different stages with a timer. I've read this has been introduced in other games, and I can definitely see the appeal. At first, it feels a bit off. Enemies don't spawn in the most convenient locations, the timer remains a looming threat, and your combos only go up to about 3 before they fizzle out. But once you play it a few times, it clicks. You notice where enemies are going to spawn and how many. The time increases much higher than you initially thought because there are orbs with a time boost, and your combos hit the double digits once you understand how enemies work and obtain enough power-ups to customize your playstyle to dispatch them efficiently. In short, it's really fun. It frames the game in a more arcade gameplay loop, and I think it works really well. Overall, I really enjoyed my time with Resident Evil Village. It was losing me at the end of its story, but the replayability and their incentives kept me around for multiple playthroughs, and will do so for more. I'm really impressed with what Capcom was able to do, and will definitely be checking out any new Resident Evil games they release and catching up on their back catalog. Totally give it a shot if anything I said here sounds dope. And that's really all I got here. Thanks for watching. I'm not sure how long this video is at this point, but I imagine it's quite long based on my page count for the script. But thanks for getting to this point or skipping through the video's timecode at this particular moment. That's really cool. I'm definitely going to be working on some more videos and have a few ideas coming up, so please stay tuned, subscribe if you want to stay up to date with all those videos and stuff, and I'll see you in the next one. Hope you have a good one. See ya.